W Eau Claire's Faculty Academic Staff Forum. My name is Erica Benson. I'm the Director of the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. I am delighted to introduce today's speaker. Jamie Tester Morfoot is an associate professor in the Department of Social Work. Prior to higher education, Jamie worked with court-appointed youth in residential treatment and as a guardian ad litem. She is passionate about providing individuals with practical skills so they feel confident in their ability to support and protect the youth in their lives. Before I turn things over to Jamie, I do want to let all of you know that we will have time for questions and discussion after the talk. And to our online viewers, I want to encourage you to ask your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and our wonderful graduate assistant, Matt, will read those out. And Jamie, I'll just ask you if we get any questions from the audience, if you could give a brief recap so that our remote viewers can also hear the question. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jamie Tester Morfoot.
Thank you. All right, so thank you everyone for coming, and for everybody that's online, thank you for attending. Public speaking is always an interesting thing, but it makes it pretty easy when you get to talk about things that you love. So today I'm going to talk about child advocacy studies training, and why I believe that really any discipline can benefit from the training and what it has to offer. So in order to talk about CAST, you have to talk about Victor Vieth. It's just sort of a requirement. So CAST is a multidisciplinary curriculum that is used to help prepare professionals, both in academia as well as in the workforce, to be able to identify, respond, and react to child maltreatment. And it really came from, Victor Vieth was a prosecuting attorney, and I'll go through a little quick timeline here to sort of help you understand how we got to today. So in 1988, Victor graduated from law school, and he took a job as a prosecuting attorney. And in his first 2 weeks as an attorney, what we would call a baby attorney usually, he prosecuted his first termination of parental rights case. And in that case, there was a social worker that was testifying on the stand, and that social worker was being hammered pretty hard by the defense attorney because they had picked the child up and removed them from the home, which is a big no-no. You need police involvement to remove a child from the home. And when the social worker was asked, the social worker responded and said, I didn't know what, on the stand, testified and said, I didn't know what to do. The child was covered in maggots, so I just picked them up and moved them. And I've heard Victor tell that story multiple times, and he says, I had lived a life. I realized in that moment I'd lived a life where I didn't realize or know that children could be living in maggots. So fast forward to 2004. So in a partnership with Gunderson Health and Winona State University, they were given $5.6 million grant over a 7-year period of time to develop a post-secondary curriculum that would help prepare professionals better to work in these environments. Fast forward again to 2013, and as a baby attorney, I was sitting at my law school graduation, and Victor happened to be the commencement speaker. And I was coming out of practice as a social worker and had gone back to law school. And he talked about the CAST program. And I remember just sitting through my commencement speech, which I always think is funny because I think most of us can't remember our commencement speeches. But I did remember my commencement speech that day, and him talking about CAST and this program, and me thinking the entire time that I was hearing him speak that I wished I'd had that training, because I had also been a baby social worker 10 years earlier, and had not always felt prepared for what I came into contact with. And so then, just to clarify then, in 2018, The Winona State and Gunderson Health and a bunch of other programs were all incorporated into the Zero Abuse Project. So the CAS program is now housed under one large program called the Zero Abuse Project out of St. Paul. So that's how we've gotten here today. So in order to understand CAS, you also have to understand the framework around what its intent is. And so one of the main frameworks for CAST is that if you create classrooms that look like the work environment will be more seamless. So creating classrooms that are much more multidisciplinary for the professionals that are going to work to prevent maltreatment. It's also a very skill-based curriculum. So absolutely talking about theories and laws behind child maltreatment, but really it's focused on how do we practice the skills that professionals are going to need after they've identified the maltreatment and child abuse. And then the last is that we know that when professionals work together in a multidisciplinary way, we just end up with better outcomes for children and families. And so understanding that, I always say, like, little people come with big people. We want that for them. We want all little people to have big people and adults in their life. And so we just have to acknowledge that when we have better outcomes for kids, it probably means that we have better outcomes for families in general. And so those are really the main things that CAS kind of functions on. So in 2021, the Zero Abuse Project was granted another OJDP grant to take a look at where are the skills that CAST and professionals really need. And so they ended up with 443 responses to this to their survey and their research. And the professionals that they surveyed were primarily frontline workers, so your CPS workers. They also then surveyed individuals who work at what we call child advocacy centers, so those that would do interviewing and things like that when child abuse is suspected. And then also 83 people responded who were educators in post-secondary education, so both faculty and administration. But it's important to note that the faculty and administration that responded to that survey were not professionals that were already teaching in a CAS curriculum, and I'll get to why that's important in a little bit. But so understanding that. So with response from frontline workers, that was 175 people responded who were frontline workers. And these were the things that they stated were the most important thing for mandated reporters to know when coming out of their educational experience, so that these were the aspects of skills that they felt that you just had to be able to sort of hit the ground running in that first job that you get coming out of your academic experience. So this is taken, I'm going to talk about who are mandated reporters in the state of Wisconsin. So this is taken straight from the statute. And these are people that I think that we all sort of expect are going to make the list, right? And these are professionals that going into their profession, I think when they declare their major, they know that this is going to be part of their profession. They understand that they're going to be expected to report child maltreatment, identify it, and they understand it's going to be not the only part, but a significant part. They aren't surprised by it, I guess, is what I would say. So all of these people are also listed in the statute. And these are another group of professionals that I think know going in, but it definitely is not an aspect of their profession that causes them to choose that profession. I also would guess that maybe they have a limited understanding of how often this might come up for them. That it's something that maybe they'll see, but they don't think it's something that they'll see very often. In true lawyer form, I always love this one, right? The otherwise not designated, but we're going to include you too, right? So that includes your lunch lady, that includes your IT guy, that includes the front office manager, right? It includes your coaches. If you are employed by the school district, you are a mandated reporter, which I think is another thing that often people don't realize, right? They think of teachers, they think of administrators, they think of the school nurse, the school counselor, but there isn't always that when you go and take a job with a school district, understanding that you are hired by the school district, you are a mandated reporter. We get into medical, right? So understanding that these are individuals who are considered experts in their field, okay? And so oftentimes I would say this is a group who some of them know that they're going to be mandated reporters, but I don't know that everybody on this list has any idea that they're going to be a mandated reporter when they declare or decide what they want to do as a professional. I'm not sure that a physical therapist always thinks about that when they say they want to be a physical therapist. And so some of these definitely probably know it. Again, I would say maybe aren't always as aware of how much of their job it will entail or not. But they are definitely experts in their field, and so that's why they end up on the list usually. And then the last is this other group, right? Who probably may not have thought about it at all that they would be mandated reporters, but also make the list. And so I always like to highlight the public assistance workers. So those are people who do numbers for a living, probably have accounting degrees or economics degrees or those kinds of things. I'm going to guess when they were pursuing those professions, they had no idea they were going to be mandated reporters. It just happens to be where they chose to take a job, which then changes their status of becoming a mandated reporter. So some of us have come into our profession knowing, and then there's some who it's based on the job that you take or who your employer is that may impact whether or not you're a mandated reporter. As we move then, according to the 2023 U.S. Department of Health and Human Services report on child maltreatment, that's a mouthful of a report that comes out. This is the number of mandated reports that were filed in 2020, between 2019 and 2023. So just under 4.9 million reports were filed in total. Now keep in mind that that number is about reports. That actually entails 7.8 million children. When social workers receive a report, there's sort of a process, or there is a process that we go through, which we call screen in or screen out, meaning we take a look at the report, based on the information that's in that report, then social workers make the decision of whether or not this is something that rises to the level of a response from social workers in going out and investigating and having a conversation, or is there not enough information for us to impose ourselves on someone's life, right? In this country, we take the right to parent very seriously, and so we tend to be cautious, and I think people appreciate that. We are cautious about imposing social workers into people's lives because that is a trauma for a family to have that. And so social workers make those decisions based on what's in those reports. So when we think about who's making those reports, so oftentimes when we think about children who've experienced maltreatment, a lot of people will say, well, where was the social workers? The hard part is that we don't show up until there's a problem. In 2023, this comes from the same report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. 70% of the reports that were filed by professionals. Of that 70%, 50% of those were filed by legal and law enforcement personnel, education personnel, and medical personnel. Then we get to human services. And the main reason for that is because if we think about it, our teachers spend 30 to 40 hours a week with our children. They're seeing our kids way more. I mean, I often say my kid's teacher sees him more than I do awake at this point, right? And then law enforcement and medical, they're seeing kids when there's a crisis. Social service personnel often are not involved until one of those other three professionals have already been involved. When we think about then who needs to make sure that they have and understand the skills to file those reports, we really want to make sure that those top 3 professions really understand the responsibilities that they have as well as the skills that it's going to take to do it. So that same study then that Zero Abuse Project did in 2021 also took a look at from the Child Advocacy Center affiliates, and these were the skills that they said, if you're going to be somebody who's filing reports on a fairly regular basis, these are the skills that are important for you to have. So they really focused on that it's really hard work to work with children who've experienced trauma. So you need to not only have talked about self-care, but you need to understand the skills that it takes to have longevity in your career, because it's hard and mentally tolling work. You need to understand how multidisciplinary teams work. So that you can, again, serve children well, serve families well, work collegially with your colleagues. And then also really focused on some of those other ones in those next few, really focus on the importance of not just understanding and being able to identify maltreatment in the moment, but understanding the long-term effect that maltreatment and abuse can have on children with regard to development and trauma, and even as they age into adulthood, that that impact is lifelong at times. Then we get to what did the faculty say, right? And so 85 people responded. And again, just to be clear, these are faculty who are not teaching in a CAST program. And they said, this is what we're teaching, which isn't bad. These are all the topics that we would hope would be covered. The key is that they're really teaching about professional response, not practical practitioner skill response, right? So they're talking about that as a teacher, you have a responsibility to report child maltreatment, but they aren't necessarily practicing how do you actually do that. What is it going to be like when you call them to call in a report? What questions are they going to ask you? What information are you going to want to have at your disposal so that you don't you reduce your own anxiety, right? What is it going to? How much information is the person that you're reporting on going to have about you, right? Like having those really real conversations. Programs that are teaching, and this isn't just social work, this would be any program that teaches about mandated reporting. So nursing, education, counseling, all of those, psychology. They're teaching about this information, but they're not then transferring it to be skill-based as well. So why is it important to teach skills? If you said to me, and I've never made lasagna, but I'm going to make lasagna tonight, right, for the first time. And I think I see lasagna in my future. Definitely, like I'm watching something and I'm like, yep, that's going to be lasagna. But then I get to the end of the day, and remember, I've never made lasagna before. Lasagna can be a little complicated. I'm nervous to make lasagna because if it doesn't turn out, like then I don't have dinner. And suddenly I start to talk myself out of that maybe I don't actually have all the ingredients for lasagna. You know, I thought the recipe said ricotta, but I've heard other people use cottage cheese, so maybe it's okay that I don't make lasagna. Like I probably should double check again tomorrow, and I'll make lasagna tomorrow if it's there. Because we will talk ourselves out of something that makes us anxious and nervous. And anything that requires a new skill is going to make us anxious and nervous. But if we've already done it, it reduces our anxiety. And although the stakes are high, it's not as imposing for us to do it. We don't, our anxiety is reduced with regard to process, even though content may still be making us anxious. Why then is the CAST curriculum so important? And a lot of it is about this skill-based practicing. When it comes to identification, in CAST curriculum, which we have here at UWEC, we do a lot of practicing of identifying maltreatment, as well as then walking through the process of what would your next steps be? How would you handle this? How would you confront a family? Should you confront a family? Should you file a report? If you file the report, what does that look like? And the reason that CAST is so important is I put up there, no harm, no foul. You're not dealing with real kids. You're not dealing with a child in your classroom. You're not dealing with a kid that you see in therapy. You get to make mistakes. And if there's anything we know from the research with regard to the current generation of post-secondary education students, it's that they're running a little bit higher when it comes to anxiety about making mistakes. And so we want to give them opportunities to make lots and lots of mistakes in really low stake situations, which is our classrooms, not their classrooms when they're the teacher, right? Documentation. There's always a rub between professions. Why didn't the social workers do anything? Social workers need really specific things. We have to assess for safety. And so we need specific things in that documentation that when you file that report to be able to make decisions. That's not me saying that anyone should ever put something in a report that doesn't exist, but it's knowing what you should put in a report so that those that are going to respond and react to allegations of maltreatment have all the information in order to do that. So I always think of that as like the help me help you, right? If you really think that this kid is in danger, make sure that I have all the information that you have so that I can make a decision to then take the next steps to make sure that we keep kids safe. Mandated reporting, that's really about expectations. That just goes to sort of what I've already touched on a little bit. If you know what the questions are that they're going to ask you, if you've actually seen the report form, it makes it a whole lot less scary. If you know that a mandated report is confidential, they're not going to tell the person that you reported that you are the reporter. That helps to reduce anxiety. So just minimizing the amount of unknown, I guess, around what that process will look like. And then the last is so teaching in the CAS program here at UWEC, I really enjoy the conversations that students have when it's across disciplines, because a student will say something and I love when they're sitting at a table and like another student's head like whips around because they're like, wait a second, like that is not what we would do in our profession, right? And so then they get to have these really great conversations because different disciplines approach social systems and social problems very differently. And so when we understand why a different discipline is approaching something the way that they are, it helps us to have empathy and also work together, right? It helps us to say, well, where can you bend and where is a must, right? The maybes versus the musts. And so that we can, again, result in better outcomes for kids. So I am a pretty strong believer in the CAS program. Like I said, when I heard about it in 2013, I was mesmerized. When I came to UWEC in 2015, I talked about it as part of my research agenda for that I wanted to bring that program here. And so I think that it's pretty exciting that we have this program. And so I would love to see every kind of major in our classes.
Talk a little bit about the exceptions, like clergy and lawyers have.
But what are the exceptions when it says that clergy get an exception and attorneys get exceptions? You're right on par with students in class. Lawyers is really easy. For attorneys, it's client attorney privilege. So the way it's listed for attorneys is that attorneys always may report. They are not required to report because of attorney-client privilege. For clergy, if confession is a part of regular practice within your religious practice, then you are not required to report. You're not mandated to report. It's another in the statute. It's listed as a may versus must. So for all the other professions, it would be listed as you must report in this situation if you suspect child abuse or neglect or maltreatment. For those two professions, you always can, it's just you're not a must. The question is whether or not is the CAS curriculum scenario based, simulation based, and I would say yes. And there's a lot of learn it, look at it, apply it, and do it again. So for example, my students right now are practicing documentation. So they are quite literally watching video clips from just fun videos that I find from mainstream movies where there's a social worker involved, and they play they document the scene as though they were the social worker. And so it's really practicing, like, what did you see? What's the important information? How, right? So it's writing in a way that is going to be useful to social workers so that they understand that. And also, yeah, we do simulations in class where they practice, like I said, identifying, they make decisions. What questions do you want to ask? So there's simulations that we run involving kids that disclose in a classroom that maybe they're being abused. So they really get to practice like, what questions would you ask this child, which is always really fun because they look to me and I'm like, I'm not the teacher, right? Like, what would you do? And so that's where it really gets to be that sometimes they do it wrong, right? I mean, they make the wrong decision, but then we get to talk about that. And I think the best part about that is we've all made a decision that was the wrong decision, didn't make it again, right? And so that's the benefit, is like, if they make the wrong decision in the classroom and we get to have a conversation, they probably are not going to make that choice out in the professional world. So the referral phone call is so they're actually calling to tell the parent that the report was screened out, so nothing else is going to happen. But it gives them also empathy for what that feels like as a parent, to have somebody call and tell you that someone has called and thought you were abusing your child. And so for those that are then going to go into professions, I think that helps to create empathy for that. That's a really scary thing for parents. And that's being told that you don't have anything to worry about. We're actually not going to come do anything. We're just calling to tell you this happened, and actually, based on the report, we'd like to tell you about a resource that's helpful in the community. But people's gut reaction is, what? Like, wait, someone thinks, and so yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Leah. Like, there's a lot of students who they both look forward to it and also are super anxious about a phone call that literally probably takes a total of 7 minutes of their life. But they talk themselves up quite a bit about it.
I have two questions. One is, which other academic departments on campus are you finding the most interest among faculty and majors within that? And then my next question is, if you're aware of how many past schools or universities there are now.
We just expanded to a CAST minor that will hit catalog this coming fall. This semester was the first semester that we were able to offer one of our CAST courses in an online format, and the course filled within a day, and we had to open a second section. There's 72 students between the two sections, and we have, I think it's 57 of those students are not social work majors. So I would say the most common discipline that we see would be psychology, criminal justice, probably, which I think at UWEC that makes sense, because those would be majors that require a certificate or a minor. The challenge becomes nursing students are interested. It's about catching them before they get into their clinicals for timing, and the same with education. But I have been partnering with the education department so that at least I'm getting into their classrooms, and I actually present in a couple of the special education classes and the ed studies class, specifically around at least mandated reporting, so that they really get to practice identifying whether or not something they should mandate it report or not. And so we do some skill building that way. I believe CAST is now in over 100 institutions in the US, and we are one of 2 in Wisconsin, but we're the only in Wisconsin that has a minor. I believe Oshkosh just started a certificate program.
It's interesting to note, actually beat out the nursing. I don't know if that's still the case, but they going on a nursing department might be a resource to have ours connected with, so you might be able to help connect with that.
Yeah, and I think it just in some schools it's across multidisciplinary, even in their program. Our program just happens to be completely housed in social work. We built it out from some of the courses that we already had, because CAS has a very distinct curriculum that you have to follow with course sequencing that you have to offer. And so it just worked for us to build it out of the social work department. So all of our CAST classes have a social work prefix. Yeah, so the question is the resource drain, that if 50% of those reports are screened out, that, still somebody's having to review those reports and make decisions about even screening them out. And so does CAST kind of focus on that? And I would say, so professionally and based on the research, we actually know that there's probably more reports than there ever should be. And not because they're screened out because they're inadequate, it's because of bias that exists. So we know that families of color are disproportionately reported on. And so CAS really focuses on processes to remove bias. We walk through, so kind of to Erica's question around simulations, some of the simulations we run through have a very rigid process of like helping students to practice, identify what are the facts are and exactly what the facts are, not what you feel, not your hypotheses, right? And it really helps students to slow down and think about, what do I actually know is a fact, which helps to clean up those reports. Because if you don't know, then you don't know, right? You can't impose what you believe. So I feel like that's one place that being trained as a social worker and an attorney helps me. I often say to students, nobody cares what you think. Nobody cares what you believe. Nobody cares what you feel. We only care what we can prove, right? And so helping them to understand what should be in a report, and also then what they actually know, because you can't report something that you think or feel. So I would say that the CAS curriculum does two things in helping to reduce those reports. One is helping them to differentiate what they know as fact and what is a hypothesis, and then also helping them to recognize their own bias, or identify, or at least processes that would help to eliminate their bias, even if they don't identify it. Yeah.
All the students understanding is it statutes that understand sort of, at least in Wisconsin, the rules as to what you have the burden of proof. I don't like using lawyer words because I'm probably using it wrong. But is there any education about this is what the state would consider?
I can't speak for every CAS program. I can speak for ours. I teach straight from the statute. So teaching about what is statutorily considered physical abuse in the state of Wisconsin. Another thing that often adds to the number of reports is things that are reported that are actually fall under neglect in the state of Wisconsin. So neglect for reasons of poverty is not child abuse, right? We don't challenge or involve ourselves in people's lives because of being poor. And so that often is over-reported. And so that's actually the examples when Leah was talking about that assignment for referral phone calls. That's actually the assignment that they practice, is that somebody has reported something that probably falls under neglect for reasons of poverty. And so that's why they're providing the family with a resource that would exist in the community that might support that family. I think it's important for students to know the law. And I always encourage them then, if they're going to change states, to really look at what the law, because the law is in each state, because statutorily the way abuse and neglect is defined is different state to state.